We would like to speak about a number of issues that perhaps are very relevant in contemporary times. And of course, it revolves around Parshas Vayera. And the first issue is Kiruv Rechoikim, which is very, very important. And Rechoikim necessarily does not mean secular Jews, that we will be interested in inspiring them and making them more religious, but it will be anybody that we're interested, as we said a moment ago, not just bringing into the fold, but even raising them to higher levels of commitment to Judaism. So we have over here, at the beginning of Parshas Vayera, the famous section dealing with Achnosas Orchim of Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu extended hospitality to wayfarers. And it would appear, according to Rashi, and according to our sages, Pshuta Shel Mikra, that Avram Avinu was not aware that these were angels. On the contrary, he thought that these were lowly Arabs. And not only did he think they were lowly Arabs, but on the other hand, Avram Avinu was suspicious that maybe they were idolaters, and they're the worst of all idolaters because they bow down to the dust of their feet. So he said, Rachatze Raglechem, you should wash your feet, says Rashi of Avodah Zarah, because he suspected them being of the Avodah Zarah. And all of a sudden, we encounter Avram Avinu's strange actions and reactions. He is in the midst of speaking with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's halacha l'maisa. When Avram Avinu said, he said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please do not pass me by. I have to excuse myself. I have to now deal with the mitzvah of hospitality of Achnosas Orchim. So we learn from this, the Gedolah, Achnosas Orchim, Yosem Agbolas Pnei Ashchina. It might even be greater than Agbolas Pnei Ashchina. There are commentators that say that the word Gedolah means it is more outstanding and more noble than Kabbalas Pnei Ashchina, than having Hashras Ashchina speaking, as it were, with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ki'ish Shemedaber El Chaver, like a person speaks to his fellow man. So Avram Avinu left the Shechina, departed from the Shechina, excused himself. And why did he do this? In order to implement his life's mission of Achnosas Orchim. However, we see even something more strange. The pasuk says, "Vayiseina vayar v'nei shloisha noshem mitzov molav vayorotz b'krosam." He ran after excusing himself from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He ran in their direction. He ran toward them. He pesach ha'el. Vayishtachu arza. He bowed down to them. And the Sfas Emes already points out, very unusual that he should bow down to such simple people. What is the purpose of Vayorotz making such a big commotion and Vayishtachu Arza bowing down to them? Very strange. In addition, the next pasuk is even stranger. Vayoymal Adnim no matzasichem beinecha no savo me'alavdecha. So Kipshutai, he says, Al Nasava Me'al Avdecha, speaking to Godel Shebe Malachim, and he seems to indicate that they are the Gvirim, they're the important people, the VIPs, and he is their servant. So difficult to understand Avram's behavior here. He addresses himself with such great hachnoya, such great submission, that it almost borders on Hanifa of ingratiating himself as he states openly that he's their servant. They're the outstanding VIP people. So apparently, we derive from this Parsha a Meridiki Yesod. And it's very, very relevant to us. In the times of Avram Avinu, there was literally a tinoik shenishba beino akum. He was mamish a tinoik shenishba beino akum. Realistically, the entire world was simply ignorant of the existence of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And that, of course, he created the world, and he's the owner of the world. And it was Avram Avinu who undertook the mission of proclaiming Kaviyachol to be the creator of the world, the owner of the entire world. He owns everything, the entire cosmic universe, and he also owns us. He created us, and his hand lay very heavily on us, and he obligated us with the Zion mitzvah. We're speaking historically. People are ignorant of this. So he undertook this mission and he tried to implement it. How did he try to implement it? So he understood to achieve this lofty goal, first and foremost, he must attempt to make a hiskarvis with these people. He has to create an element of togetherness with these individuals in order to have an influence over them. And the ways and means to achieve this is to express great respect and even reverence to the people that he wishes to be mekarev, that he wishes to draw closer to him. And perhaps then will he be able to make them followers of his faith and of his principles, and attain the ultimate goal, which he did attain, nefesh, asher asu b'charon, says the Yunkelis, the shabidu lo reise, sheichnisan tachas kanfei hashchina. Rashi brings down the Yunkelis, he was mishabdem, he committed them to a Torah. He brought them tachas kanfei hashchina. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not in any way maintain an anger too long. There was anger, but at the end it was rescinded, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, after the time where the rulers were the Avodah Zarah, restored the boundaries of the Jewish people. And on an individual level, so we see over here something remarkable. He brings down from the Gemara, Kisira, Chamor Sainacha Revetz Tachas Masar. When you see the load of a donkey belonging to your enemy, you have a mitzvah to unload it. And this will also supersede the mitzvah of loading an animal for your friend, who he himself is not crafty enough, he doesn't have the ability to do it himself. Very strange. But first, the Gemara in Psachim, if Yud Gimel, asks, who is this Soinacho? Usually the Torah refers to a fellow man as a reya, a neighbor, a friend, a comrade. All of a sudden, Torah formulates the mitzvah of prika, of unloading, doing a toiva, doing a favor for chamor soinacho, for the chamor that belongs to your enemy. It's forbidden for a Jew to hate his fellow Jew. He can't have any resentment or enmity toward him. And all of a sudden the Torah spells out clear Rachel Bitrak done in clear terms, Chamor Soinacho. So the Ramak, who wrote Taimer Dvaira, Moshe Kadavero, from the great Kabbalists of Italy, hundreds of years ago, says we're dealing with, like the Gemara says, Shiroi Soisavera V'Uyochit Shenicholoid Olov. The Soini Yisrael Dvar Avero. And Rav Nachman says, Mitzvah L'Snoisla Shenemal Yeras Hashem Sinas Ra. So the Gemara says we're talking about an individual where his fellow man, this individual who happens to have some sort of encounter with the person whose chamor has collapsed and have to unload him. So he happened to witness, there was only one witness, that he committed a heinous crime. Either Avodah Zarah or Gilei Arayos, immorality. We need to aid him in order to bring him to a judicial system and a test against him in order for him to be incriminated and punished. There's only one. So you can't have an Eid Echad that comes and says testimony in such cases where required to, but he did a very ugly act. So it's a mitzvah l'snaisa. You're allowed to hate him for that. So why did the Torah tell you to help this individual? It's a mitzvah to hate him. So the Ramak says, Shvei kiyos de beliboch, ela mitzvah lekarev oisei be'ahavo, ula yoyo b'derech zu. This is the midah of lehefzek la'arapoy. Not to be angry too long. But the Ramak says that the reason the Torah instructed you to help him, and this precedes helping a friend, somebody who's dear and precious to you, is because when he sees your effort to help him, he sees the good deed that you're doing, perhaps it will help him, and perhaps this is the correct way of helping him to do tshuva. This is exactly what we learn from Avraham Avinu. It could be Avodah Zarah. The person has to guard himself that he himself should not spiritually be injured, but nevertheless, this is the only way. And it's also not guaranteed. But if there is a way to do it, this is the way to do it. With hachnoya, with submission, with showing utmost respect for that individual. Ulai, perhaps, yoyo b'derech zu, will help in this way to make him a follower of what you represent. And we always love to say over the story we heard from Reb Uri Zohar. Reb Uri Zohar was probably one of the greatest Jews that perhaps ever lived. In Tel Aviv, he was a famous actor, singer, #1 at the box office, and also he was a chayta yumachti yasarabim, like he himself said, he was paid in order to make sure that the youth stay secular. He was their idol. There was a television station here in Jerusalem behind the central bus station. So people in Tel Aviv, his associates told him, when you go there for a performance, make sure that you never park your car in Geula. In Geula is right behind the central bus station, and to the right you have the television station. It's about 20 yards, 30 yards the most. Because if they do, they will smash the car, and you might, if you're near there, also be aggressively attacked. This is what he believed about Charedim. One day it was late. There was no parking place in the parking lot of the television station. So Reb Uri Zohar had no choice. He parked at the very outer limits of Geula, opposite the Beis Medrash of Boyan. Finished his performance. He came back, got into his car. The windows were closed, obviously, and he couldn't start it. And all of a sudden, he saw two Avrechim, young people, dressed Hasidish, long garb, payas, coming down on their respective faces, coming toward him, and he was scared to death. So he had no choice. He opened the window, so they told him, you go out. There's a bench, you sit on the bench, and we're going to push the car to the gas station, which is just around the corner. We see that you're a little bit nervous. They saw that was something. They didn't know that he was afraid of them. Right? So he got out, and he saw these two people. They took off their long coats, and it was great effort. They pushed the car a block and a half to the gas station. So when they asked Uri Zohar, who at the end of his life was a Baki B'Shas, Nu Kala Terekula, Nigle V'Nister, an expert on the Zayar, unbelievable person. It was a great day. It was a yontif for me when I would go to visit him and speak a few words with him. Out of this world. So he said that is what started him to think about Yiddishkeit. He saw that his mind was corrupted. He was fed poison about Charedim. And that's the first step that he took to start to think about Torah and religion. And it had not been for that incident, he's not sure that he would be Chayzer B'Tshuvah. It's unbelievable, but that's a very, very true story. And we have to realize we're talking about Avraham Avinu. And we're talking about people that were Avrayonim. And perhaps somebody would ask the question, Avraham Avinu is a Zakein, made in the Fikfoidai. He's not exactly the person, right? It was even B'nai Ches, Goyim recognized him. You just saw Avraham Avinu. You saw he was a prince of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He was a godly man. Charisma is not the word. He was spiritually charismatic. So there was a Zaken. So he could say, it's not the my COVID to renounce my dignity and do and speak the way I do and act the way I do. Avraham Avinu understood the opposite. That this is the way manhigim, leaders, should respond. I'm your servant. And the strangers are the VIPs. And maybe through this, they will profoundly change their way of life. This is a very big yesod, and something we always have to bear in mind, and we should realize that we are not a zaken ve'enu b'fi k'faydai. Insofar as this is concerned. The second point we want to make, we mentioned the word outer limits, and yesterday, Tesvav Mar Cheshvan was the yard site of the Chazon Ish. And the Chazon Ish lived to the outer limits of Emunah. He was really the man of faith, the man of trust in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the man of hope. He realized that Kadosh Baruch Hu is omniscient. He realized more so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is also omnipotent, a kol yochel. And we would like to compare a story which revolves around the Chazon Ish to the Ramban in this week's Parsha. So at the end of this section, we have a malach that comes to Sarah Imenu, and he says, V'nei ben l'Sarah ishtecho. He spoke directly to Avram, but Sarah, of course, heard it. And a response, we all know, Vatischak Sarah b'kirbo, achar b'loisi hoyso liyedno, 90-year-old woman, I don't have the normal biological means to produce a child. So Kadosh Baruch Hu rebuked Avram for Sarah's response. V'yemer Hashem al Avram, lo mozeh tzachak hasara. Hayipolem Hashem dovo. Is something difficult? Is something removed from the control of a Kadosh Baruch Hu? Hayipolem Hashem dovo. What is she complaining about? That's saying now I lost all my physical capacities, and my master is also old. Because Baruch said to Avram, she shouldn't laugh. She really, truly will give birth next year, despite the fact that she's an old woman and you're also old. Anything above a Kadosh Baruch Hu is controlling Hashem double. So the Ramban asked the question that we don't understand. Sarah did not know that these people were Arabs. She thought that they were not malachim. She saw Avram dealing with them, but she did not think of them to be Roshei Yeshivas, Anshe Maisa. She thought that they were simply goyim, maybe not lowlifes. Perhaps she thought they were the Arabs of before, we don't know. But surely the Ramban says there was no taina on Sarah Imenu. If that good tidings would have come from Roshei Yeshivas, Rabbonim, people of stature, she would have believed it. It came from simple individuals. Perhaps she still thought that they were Aravim Choshud on Avodah Zarah. We're not sure, but even if she would have thought that, so there's, why should she believe them? What do they know? Who are they? Not normal. So the Ramban says an unbelievable yesod that even if the lowest person in society tells you that tomorrow you will find a treasure, you will merit an unbelievable revelation of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, that a 90-year-old woman will give birth. So your response should be, you should say, Amen ken yas Hashem. Yes, I believe it. And somehow the Ramban says, we don't understand how he could say it, but the Ramban says that Sarah, of course, was a bigger Yadanis. She knew more than we knew, and we know, and we will know about HaKadosh Baruch being a kol yochel omnipotent. We don't have nothing to talk about. Nevertheless, somehow or other, at that moment, she lost a certain alertness and dako min adako. something which is very, very, very delicate. Nobody could see it but HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There was a feeling that perhaps this HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right, would not do. After all, Reb Tzadok HaKohen Lublin points out that Sarah might have thought, this is what he says, Sarah might have thought if HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted me to have a child, why did you have to wait till I'm 90? Could have had it earlier. So the Ramban says that regardless of how miraculous it seems to us, any type of Besura Tova that we hear, Melech Mashiach, Amen, Ken Yasa Hashem, and we should never, never have the sentiment, the emotion, the feeling that this is something which is above and beyond it happening now. Oh no, when Mashiach doesn't look like he's coming, no, it's wrong. Amen. Yas Hashem. Somebody says there'll be a Geula tomorrow. There'll be, you have to believe it. For sure, it'll hopefully take place. For sure, it's possible to take place. For sure, it's probable to take place. But if it's not because HaKadosh Baruch Hu can't do it. That's for sure. It might be other extenuating circumstances. As we mentioned a moment ago, that yesterday was the yahrzeit of the Chazon Ish. I was zeicher to see the Chazon Ish, but Hashem, we had a very big schiyah to hear from the Talmidim of the Chazon Ish for years. And just to tell over a story that covered the yahrzeit, in honor of the yahrzeit of Maran Chazon Ish. So we have something which is very similar. The Chazon Ish lived this. He lived in the outer, literally the outer limits of Emunah. In the beginning of World War II, September 1939 was the beginning of World War II. So in Yerushalayim, the Rav of Yerushalayim was the famous Reb Hersh Pesach Frank. That time, the son-in-law was the famous Reb Shmuel Rozovsky. And it was about 8 or 9 months into the World War II, where Rebbetzin Frank, unfortunately, contracted pneumonia, and it was very serious. She was seriously ill, and her brother happened to come to Yerushalayim. He lived in Bnei Brak on a certain Shabbos, and they called in Motzei Shabbos Dr. Iserlich, very famous doctor, big tzaddik, Talmid Chacham, also the doctor of the Brisker Rov. He was the Rov's doctor as well, quite famous. So he said that she'll end her life another 4 days. Today's Motzei Shabbos, Wednesday night. That'll be the end of it. She can't live longer. Anyway, her brother was distraught. Went back to Bnei Brak Motzei Shabbos, and he came to the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish was not that well known by the general public, but by certain individuals, he was well known. Her brother was a big Rav, went into the Chazon Ish, told him the story, what can be done? So the Chazon Ish smiled, and he said, this is the exact words of the Chazon Ish. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu could create 2/3 of Ma'aseh Bereishis, Shomayim v'oretz v'chol tzvo, in 4 days, created 2/3 of the world, heaven, earth, all the constellations as well. So in 4 days, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a Be'er Refuah, who creates medication, will create a medication for your sister. not to worry. Her brother departed, and he told over to an associate of his. He thinks the Chazon Ish did not understand what's going on. He's so out of it, he's so involved in learning theoretical things that he didn't have the practicalities. She's an older lady, 70-80%, that's the statistics, leave the world, and he tells me not to worry. Baruch created Shamayim v'Aretz v'chol tzvon, 2/3 of Shamayim v'Aretz v'chol tzvon in 4 days, so he'll create the refuah. Anyway, he left very, very distraught and in a dismal state of mind. Interestingly, Sunday morning, everybody listened to the radio because Hitler Yamach Shemoy was successful. He was very, very successful. The one that was responsible, more or less, for keeping some sort of hope alive and for uplifting the spirits of the people was Winston Churchill. He was a tremendous speaker. He knew how to lift the spirits. And Sunday morning, he had not addressed the world here in Palestine. He translated into Hebrew, to English. He spoke in English, translated into Hebrew, from the English, sorry. So he had not been heard of for a month. There were rumors that perhaps he was assassinated, perhaps other things took place, so the spokesman said that he's going to speak. Sunday morning, 9 o'clock, you'll hear Winston Churchill. But the reason he did not speak because he had pneumonia, and they tried many ways to cure him. A week ago or so, they tried an experimental drug which is called antibiotics penicillin. And indeed, after a few days, he got better, and in a few minutes he will speak. So of course they heard this. They told him to Dr. Isserlich. So Dr. Isserlich went to the Rav Roshi at the time, was Rav Herzog, who happened to be a citizen of England. He had to be, before he became the Rav Roshi here in Eretz Israel, he was the chief rabbi of Ireland. He had connections with the English Parliament. So he asked someone there to get a few containers of this new drug, which they couldn't pronounce here in Yerushalayim, antibiotica penicillin. They have it all like this, antibiotics penicillin. And the reason that he did it because he was hopeful that this experimental drug would help. Anyway, it arrived on a plane, which came every Sunday with supplies for needy soldiers. Late afternoon, they picked it up, they gave it to Dr. Isserlich. He administered to her Sunday, again on Monday, again on Tuesday, and Wednesday morning she got up ke'echadal. Perfect. So that's the message that the Chazon Ish wanted to give us, very similar to what the Ramban tells us as far as Sari Meinu was concerned. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a Kol Yochel. Osir lehisyayesh. He created Shamayim v'Aretz, 2/3 of it, in 4 days. He can also bring about a refuah for Rebbe's and Frank and Kachavel. Shmuel Rozovsky loved to tell over this story. This is in honor of the Chazon Ish's Yortzeit. We could speak hours about stories of the Chazon Ish's greatness. Reb Tzaddik in Divrei Seifrim says as follows: Ein liyehudi lehisyayesh mishum dover. A Jew should never, never abandon hope. Whether it's physical, material matters, like the Gemara says, even if there's already a sword that is sharp on somebody's neck, he should not abandon hope of having compassion of Kadosh Baruch Hu being saved by the last minute. And never be Yonei HaNefesh. if somebody, Rahmana Litzlan, has reached the bottom, is involved in chatoyim, the worst type of taivus, where Chazal say it's almost impossible to do tshuva. He has sunk to the deepest abyss, totally involved in lusting after objects to the point that he does averis. Al Yisai Shasma, you should never abandon hope. No Yehudi should abandon hope, as HaKadosh Baruch Hu can help him raise himself to dizzying heights. And the whole binyan of Ummah Yisraelis, how did we build our nation? Achar Hayiyush. When there was no hope. We were helpless and hopeless. And the greatest example, illustration, is the Torah that Avraham and Sarah Zikanin. And Sarah says, Mimila Avraham. Whoever would have thought at such an age Avraham could have a child? Heinika bonim l'Sarah. Shaloi Allah al das odomecho doid lahamin zeh. If anybody would have been confronted with this situation, nobody would believe such a miracle would have happened. Sorry, Yodot, Kadosh Baruch Hu kol yochol ve'emino d'Hashem yisbarach kol yochol ve'im kol zeh. She's the greatest Yedanias of the kol yochol, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Almighty is omnipotent. There was some sort of laughter in her personality. Shoyachochai gets the lahamin zeh biyodo Avram, that he's not capable of doing it. Although she realized abstractly that there's no difference by Kadosh Baruch Hu granting a woman of 18 a child or granting a woman of 90 a child. She realized that. But at that moment, lacked a certain alertness, so it was a little bit far-fetched. It was destined at the very outset that Kadosh Baruch Hu would not give her a child when she was young. On the contrary, he wanted that they should just about abandon hope, think that it's very, very remote that such a happening should occur. Ad kedei kach that it was Yisha Gomer Shleihem in Shum Odom Afilu Sarah. And here we learn Kizeh Kol Odom HaYisraeli Lahamim She'ein Lehisyayish Klal B'Yoylam Hashem Yisbarach Yochel Lazar V'Lipolim Meis Hashem. And nobody should start making chakiras. Lo Mosa Hashem Kachal. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do this? Why did he not give her a child earlier? We don't ask such questions. What do we learn is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to tell us that the way we will establish the Jewish nation is with the difficulties. Almost we reach a situation where we are totally helpless, surrounded by enemies, whether we have personal tzaras, general tzaras, whatever it is, altis yayish, because always at that moment when we really feel the helplessness, but we have the hopefulness that Kadosh Baruch Hu will help us, the Yeshua will come.